yes, my talk is about why I think we all need a fashion fast. But we get tempted, don't we? So whether that's about looking around the sales or getting those emails with special offers, we get tempted to buy clothes on lots of occasions. Each year, each one of us spends about, I think it's £1,042 a year on clothes, new clothes. So it's interesting to think, do you think you spend a bit more than that, a bit less than that, or does that sound about right? So each year, all of us in the UK are buying around 1 million tonnes of clothes. And if you think there's 66 million of us in the UK, so that's quite a lot of clothes. One of the things, as mentioned, as a charity, we want to look at is how can we start to talk to people about their habits in regard to fashion? So in thinking about us asking other people to do that, myself and a colleague, Carrie-Anne, decided that for 2018, we wouldn't buy any brand new clothes at all. And we're certainly not the first people to take on this challenge. It's something that lots of people have done before. But we thought, if we're going to ask other people, then we really need to explore our own habits. As an individual, I've always been interested in the environment. So at primary school, I was creating my own posters and asking if I could put them up in the staff room about recycling. And this was the early 80s, so it wasn't particularly mainstream then. There's always a pigeon in anything I do. So this is just to demonstrate that my house was the house where all the injured animals came to be looked after. So I think I've always had this relationship with nature and the environment and had a feeling around it. So having said all of that, I felt like I'm quite a conscious consumer already. I buy secondhand anyway, so I thought this is probably going to be quite straightforward. So we started our challenge in January 2018, and we both found that actually not being able to just have a wander around the sales seemed quite strange. We both work in the city centre, and we felt a bit of a loss about not being able to just go and have a look. But once we realised that there was no point in going to have a look, the shops had nothing to offer us, you stop going in. And actually it's quite liberating to just walk past, not go in, and actually to delete those emails that say 50% off or 70% off. So we both came to that realisation quite quickly and spent our time doing other things, which was really interesting. However, during the course of the year, I did find there were a few triggers. So there were a few times when I felt like I wanted to shop. If I was feeling a bit low, or if I needed a confidence boost, if I felt like I deserved some kind of treat, or if I had a special occasion, like today. However, everything I'm wearing is secondhand. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is why do we shop? So when we're even thinking about buying something new, our brains are all geared up and they're ready and waiting for that reward. Lots of research has shown from the 60s about consumer behaviour that far from being rational beings, we're actually influenced by a whole range of internal and external factors when we're making these kind of decisions. How we do planned expenditure as opposed to impulsive is very different. And of course, all of this is really wrapped up in our worldviews. So what expectations do we have of ourselves, how we should present ourselves to the world, and how do we think we'll gain approval from other people? And the fashion industry is really clever at tying into all of that. You can see here that 79% of women say that they feel they're most confident when they're wearing something brand new. And 17% of young people said they wouldn't wear an outfit again if it had been seen on Instagram. So a real mix of internal and external influences in how we behave. This research also showed that we still like to shop face-to-face as our main way of shopping, although online shopping is obviously on the increase. And women are far more likely to buy something brand new for a special event. None of this may come as a surprise to you so far. In terms of what we have at home, again, I'd really like you to think about what you have in terms of items of clothing. The average woman owns 95 items of clothing, and the average man 56. Both men and women tend to have about 40% of their clothes that they just don't wear. So all those things sitting around in drawers that aren't being worn at all. So that's quite an interesting thing when you think about what goes into making clothes, which I'd like to talk to you about, and the fact that lots of them are just sitting there not being used. So thinking about fashion and where fast fashion in particular, came from, this is Bieber. Some of you might be familiar with Bieber. Bieber started as a mail order service in the early 60s. It was started by a lady called Barbara Hulanicki. And this, not that you can tell, but it's a pink gingham dress. It was really iconic, and it was one of their first products. And they had estimates of sales of around 500 of these. They thought they might sell about 500. And they ended up selling 17,000. And it was the first time that high fashion, affordable items were available to people. So their target market of under 30s absolutely loved it, and they couldn't get enough of it. By 1964, Bieber had a 7-storey department store in Kensington, and it was attracting 1 million customers a week. So it took off massively. One of Bieber's claims to fame is that it popularised the miniskirt. And this must have been a really, really exciting time for fashion. It was a complete clothes revolution. So you can see how some of what we do now was born. So a few of the things I want to talk about today are, there's a few statistics thrown in here. WRAP as an organisation has been leading the way in terms of waste and recycling for a number of years. And their recent report called Valuing Our Clothes I would highly recommend having a look. But I want to pull out some of the key points from that today. In addition, the UK government has brought this issue into sharp focus. The Environmental Audit Commission launched an inquiry in June 2018, and they brought the whole industry together. And lots of the findings of that have been brought together in this recent report. Again, I'll highlight some of the things from this today. So, British shoppers buy far more clothes than anywhere else in Europe. And we're buying twice as many as we used to a decade ago. So there's a real increase here. And the growth in clothes tends to be high fashion, low quality, fast turnaround clothes. So this is that fast fashion that I'm talking about. Because this fashion is so fast, it doesn't get time to do the wear tests. So the quality is low, and the clothes aren't actually built to last. They're built to just be seen on Instagram once or worn a couple of times. So is this actually a problem? Do we need to worry about this? Well, unfortunately, we do. The carbon footprint for the clothes that are in use in the UK is 26.2 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. These kind of numbers, unless you're a carbon expert, quite hard to place. Globally, that's 1.2 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. Again, a bit difficult to understand, is this really big? Is it bad? How does it compare to other things? One thing worth mentioning is that the carbon within the textiles industry is mainly tied up around the agriculture and the producing of the clothes. But the whole global carbon footprint of the textile industry is a greater contributor to climate change than aviation and shipping combined. So that might come as a surprise to you. It gives you some sense of the scale of the issue. It's not just about carbon. As you can imagine, clothing is quite water intensive. So 5 trillion litres of water are used in the global apparel industry every year. For every t-shirt and jeans combination that you have, there's around 20,000 litres of water that go into making that. And 20% of all global freshwater pollution comes from textile treatment and dyeing. In addition to this, the areas that grow lots of the cotton that we use tend to be those facing water stress already, and with climate change, that's only going to get exacerbated over the years. Cotton is a really water-intensive product to grow. It has many benefits, but it's very water-intensive, and it's expensive to produce. So the people that are growing that cotton try to maximise those yields, which leads to more pesticides, more fertilisers, and more local pollution. So there are some knock-on effects happening there too. So what happens when we get those clothes home? Research from Plymouth University has shown that every time we do a wash, we're releasing 700,000 synthetic fibres every single time we do a wash. The National Federation of Women's Institute estimates that this could be 9 trillion fibres every week just in the UK. So this is an enormous issue. The Environmental Audit Commission report recognises that government, industry and consumers really need to come together around this issue in particular to find a solution to this. These fibres are now being found in the deep sea, in Arctic sea ice, and in fish and shellfish. So it's spreading through our environment, through our ecology, and through our food chains. So once we've had enough of these clothes and we've got bored of them, what happens to them next? Unfortunately, less than 1% of clothing actually becomes new clothing. So things aren't retaining their value. Actually, 235 million items of clothing are being sent to landfill every year, just in the UK. So You can see for an industry that's so tied to beauty, this is actually quite an ugly picture. The Environmental Audit Commission's headline is that the way that we make, use and throw away our clothing is completely unsustainable and that we need a new economic model for fashion. So this is now something that is really raised in people's consciousness. So back to the story about myself and Carrie-Anne and what we did. I mentioned that we shopped secondhand, so we both did that. I've always shopped quite a lot secondhand, but probably last year my purchases probably about £700 from charity shops and online auction sites. So you could just say I swapped one habit for another one. And actually we were both still buying things secondhand, not because we necessarily needed them, but we still quite enjoyed shopping. So that was something that throughout the year I tried to tackle, and I think I've got that under control a bit more now. So with secondhand, there's obvious benefits to that. So if you can repair or reuse an item by selling it, donating it, keeping it for longer, then you're displacing that new item having to be made and all the inputs that we've already seen that go into that. But are there any other issues around secondhand? Dr. Andrew Brooks has done some work on clothing poverty, and this talks about what happens when you put those charity bags together and put them in the charity bank, or you take them to your local charity shop. So if you've got anything in there that's maybe torn, that could end up being recycled into insulation or something like that. Anything that's particularly dirty will probably still end up in landfill or being incinerated. About 10 to 30% of what we donate probably gets sold in UK charity shops, with the rest being exported overseas. And the global trade for second-hand clothes is worth £2.8 million a year. So this is a big trade, and the charities sell on those used clothes to traders in other countries so that they can sell them on. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but there are some consequences around it. It's the equivalent of 2.9 billion T-shirts just from the UK being sold to countries like Poland, Ghana and Pakistan. And the local traders there will then sell these on. Trading second-hand clothes is quite a risky livelihood because you don't know what quality you're going to have. So this can be quite difficult for the traders. And also there is an element of it forging a bit of a dependency on the West and sometimes suppressing local clothing industries from starting. So although secondhand has lots of benefits, there are some quite complex consequences that it's worth thinking about too. But the fashion industry is changing. Ellen MacArthur has been championing the circular economy principles for a new model of fashion. One of the elements of that is whether we still need to own clothes in the future. So fashion designer Phoebe English talks about renting clothes and how in that model you can still get this excitement, the endorphin high of having something brand new, but then when you've finished with it, it goes back into the system rather than being thrown away. She talks about the fact that we need these new different models to be exciting. They need to be appealing, they need to be desirable. If you think back to Bieber, it was really exciting. So anything we do that's an alternative to what we have now needs to feel like that, otherwise people just won't buy into it. In addition, there's new organisations coming onto the market with different types of materials that are much more sustainable, and some of our long-established brands are moving towards that way quite quickly. For instance, Marks & Spencer's have committed to having completely sustainable cotton by 2019, so that by the end of this year. Sainsbury's and Tesco's have both committed to the same thing by 2020. So this is something that's on the radar of all of those big organisations too. So back to Carrie-Anne and I. We finished our year, obviously, and we both did really well. We didn't buy anything brand new. At the start of the year, we came up with rules. So one of the rules was that we could still buy brand new underwear. We both stuck to that. And we shared our secondhand successes and failures with each other. It was quite nice to have somebody else that was doing the same thing because we could hold each other to account and talk about when we might have been tempted. But it taught us a lot about our habits and the fact that we were just bringing this stuff into our houses that we didn't actually need. And as I said, I'd always shopped secondhand anyway, but it was definitely supplemented by this kind of new clothes on the high street without thinking about it too much. In addition, we both took the opportunity to have a real clear out, so thinking about what do we need in our homes, clothes and other things. And actually having that clear out has been really good for both of us. And there's lots of things being talked about now about, thinking about what you have in your homes and thinking about what you need around you. So I think that's a real benefit that we both got that we weren't really expecting. So in summary, I wanted to just have a think about what everybody can do. You've seen some of the impacts of the fashion industry. They're vast and they're really devastating in terms of environmental impact. But this is one of those things that we can all do something about. So I'd encourage you to think about what it is that you actually need. It sounds obvious, but we don't all do it all the time. Have a look at what you have. Do you have 95 items of clothing? Do you have more? What do you actually wear? And donate or sell or swap those other things. One of the things Carrie-Anne found was actually that when she needed something for an occasion, she asked a friend if she could borrow something or swap something. And that was a really good source of finding something that felt new to her. Take a break from buying clothes. It really helps you to examine your habits. And we definitely uncovered things about ourselves that we didn't know. Buying secondhand when you need to. There's obviously so many options for being able to do that. Looking for more sustainable materials. I've recently been buying some maternity clothes and, some baby clothes. My maternity clothes have all been secondhand, but the baby clothes, I've been able to find sustainable cotton really easily. So there's much more out there that's available. And lastly, looking into alternative models. It sounds a bit out there, but actually if you're going for a special occasion, could you rent a new outfit rather than buy a brand new one that you won't necessarily wear again? So these are all things worth thinking about, and probably different things will work for different people. So I'd just like to say thank you for listening, and I'd encourage you to all join us on this very different kind of fashion revolution. So thank you.